The former home of Queen frontman Freddie Mercury is for sale in London. Built in 1907, the Kensington property features a bar, a library.
When Freddie Mercury passed away in 1991, the world mourned the loss of one of rock's most electrifying voices. But while millions grieved the Queen frontman they had adored on stage, his closest circle of friends were faced with something far more intimate and startling. What he left behind inside his London home, Garden Lodge. Tucked away behind tall brick walls in Kensington, the mansion wasn't just where Freddie lived. It was his sanctuary, his private world. And when the doors were finally opened after his death, the things discovered inside left even those who knew him best completely stunned. From Zanzibar to stardom. Long before the world knew him as Freddie Mercury, he was born Farrokh Bulsara on September 5, 1946 in Stone Town, Zanzibar, back when the island was still under British rule. His parents, Bomi and Jair, belonged to the Parsi community of Western India, tracing their roots to the city of Bulsar, now known as Valsad in Gujarat. They practiced Zoroastrianism, carrying their traditions with them even as life pulled them across continents. The Bulsaras had moved to Zanzibar for work. Bomi was a cashier at the British Colonial Office, but their family life was soon changed by the arrival of their son's quirks and gifts. Freddie was born with 4 extra incisors, a detail that might have been dismissed as odd by most, but to him it was the secret weapon behind that impossible vocal range. It was as if nature itself had reshaped his mouth for music. Though Zanzibar was home, most of Freddie's childhood unfolded in India. At 7, he was already learning piano while living with relatives. A year later, he was sent to St. Peter's, a British-style boarding school near Bombay. It was there he first started to bloom. By day, he collected stamps, an interest he inherited from his father and one of the few personal possessions of his that now sits in the Postal Museum in London. But by night, his world belonged to rock and roll. At 12, he pulled together a school band called the Hectics, blasting out covers of Elvis, Cliff Richard, and Little Richard with a boldness that set him apart. Friends from those days remember that he had an almost eerie ability to hear a song on the radio and then instantly replay it on the piano. It was also at St. Peter's that Farrokh Bulsara started calling himself Freddie. The name stuck, the music deepened, and by 1963 he was back in Zanzibar with his parents. But the island was a powder keg, and the timing couldn't have been worse. In 1964, the Zanzibar Revolution erupted, a violent uprising against the Sultan's Arab-led government. Thousands of Arabs and Indians were slaughtered, and the Bulsaras had no choice but to flee. Their escape landed them in England, in the grey sprawl of Feltham, Middlesex, worlds away from the tropical coastlines of Freddie's childhood. They first stayed at Hamilton Close, shifted briefly to Hamilton Road, and finally settled into a modest house on Gladstone Avenue. England became the true turning point. Freddie studied art first at Isleworth Polytechnic, and then at Ealing Art College, where he graduated with a diploma in graphic design in 1969. Those same design skills would later help him sketch the now iconic Queen crest. But in those early days, survival meant odd jobs and hustling. He worked as a baggage handler at Heathrow Airport, lugging suitcases while quietly carrying dreams far heavier than anything in those bags. He sold vintage scarves and second-hand Edwardian clothes alongside a new friend, drummer Roger Taylor. To Taylor, Freddie wasn't yet the singer the world would one day know. He was just my crazy mate, the guy who always knew where the fun was. Behind the flamboyance that was beginning to flicker, Freddie was also remembered by others as shy and quiet, someone who soaked up music more than conversation. But once he stepped on stage, the difference was night and day. In 1969, he fronted Ibex, later renamed Wreckage, a Liverpool-based band that leaned heavily into Hendrix-inspired blues. He even lived for a time above a pub on Penny Lane, soaking in Liverpool's music culture from the inside. When Wreckage fizzled out, he tried again with another group, Sour Milk Sea. But by early 1970, that too had dissolved. To anyone else, this might have looked like a string of failures. To Freddie, it was rehearsal. Every move, every band, and every moment of rejection was sharpening him for the stage where he would finally take his rightful place. The rise of a rock legend. By 1970, Freddie Mercury was no longer just the shy art student hustling scarves at Kensington Market. That spring, he joined forces with drummer Roger Taylor and guitarist Brian May, becoming the frontman of their band, Smile. A year later, bassist John Deacon completed the lineup, and the group that would soon conquer the world was born. But Freddie wasn't about to settle for an ordinary name. While others hesitated, he pushed for Queen. To him, the word was bold, commanding, and yes, deliberately provocative. He once explained that it sounded regal and splendid, strong and universal. And while he was perfectly aware of the camp connotations, that was only part of the allure. Around this time, he legally dropped Bulsara and officially became Mercury, an identity that fit his larger-than-life destiny. Even before the music exploded, he was shaping the band's identity. Just ahead of their debut album, Freddie designed the Queen Crest, a fantastical coat of arms that fused the band's astrological signs: lions for Deacon and Taylor, a crab for May, and two fairies for himself, the Virgo. A crown gleamed inside the giant Q, all of it rising under the wings of a fiery phoenix. It looked almost royal, a perfect symbol for a band that would rule stages like monarchs of rock. Freddie's natural speaking voice rested in the baritone range, but his singing pushed into soaring tenor territory, giving Queen a vocal edge few bands could match. And when it came to songwriting, he was restless, daring, and impossible to pin down. His fingerprints are all over Queen's greatest hits: Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love, Don't Stop Me Now, and more. Each one sounded like it came from a different world, because Freddie hated repetition. He admitted that he thrived on change, pulling inspiration from whatever caught his eye in music, film, or theater. Some of his songs were labyrinths of shifting keys and wild structures, like Bohemian Rhapsody or the ambitious tracks from Queen 2. Others, like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, were stripped down to just a handful of chords. What made it extraordinary was the balance. Freddie could be both complex and playful, dramatic and light, yet always magnetic. And though he often confessed he could barely read music, he composed everything on instinct, sitting at the piano and letting the ideas pour out. Of course, it wasn't just the records that defined him, it was the stage. Freddie Mercury lived for live performance. Whether it was a theater or a stadium, he commanded it with a theatricality that was equal parts tease, shock, and pure charm. Those who watched him knew they were seeing something singular. David Bowie once remarked that Freddie didn't just join the ranks of theatrical rock performers, he took things over the edge. Brian May said Freddie had a way of reaching even the last person at the back of the furthest stand, pulling every soul in the venue into his orbit. The pinnacle of that power came on July 13, 1985 at Live Aid. In just 20 minutes, Queen stole the show at Wembley Stadium. Freddie, dressed in jeans and a white tank top, had 72,000 people clapping in unison, and his sustained a cappella note became known as the note heard round the world. Years later, critics would call it the greatest live performance in rock history. For those who were there, it was more than a concert. It was a moment of transcendence. His final bow with Queen came at Knebworth Park in August 1986. Nearly 200,000 fans watched as Freddie closed with God Save the Queen, draped in a royal robe and holding a golden crown aloft. A week before, he had quietly told Brian May that he probably wouldn't be doing this much longer. The curtain was coming down, but not before he etched his image as a once-in-a-lifetime showman. On stage, he was fire. Off stage, he remained a mix of contradictions. A piano virtuoso, who gradually gave it up because he wanted the freedom to strut across the stage. A songwriter who could craft intricate operatic harmonies one day and bash out a three-chord rockabilly tune the next. He even picked up a guitar for tracks like Crazy Little Thing Called Love, proving that with Freddie Mercury, there were no limits, only reinventions. But just as unpredictable as his music was his private life. Freddie's eccentric personality and love life. He was known for his love affairs with men, but what many never knew was that Freddie Mercury had a string of romances with women too. Actresses, models, even household names. For a man who lived under the brightest spotlight in rock, he somehow managed to keep much of his private world sealed away. Those who knew him often said the same thing. There were many sides to Freddie. On stage, he was larger than life, a peacock in sequins and leather, commanding arenas like a god. Off-stage, he could be shy, elusive, and almost guarded. But when the night fell, he lived as if time itself was chasing him. He lived fast, loud, and unafraid. At his peak, Queen threw parties so wild they became the stuff of legend. None more infamous than the jazz album Bash in 1978 at New Orleans' Fairmont Hotel. Picture it: naked waiters balancing trays, wrestlers stripped bare in a bathtub, and dwarfs wandering around with silver trays of cocaine strapped to their heads. There was even a performer biting the heads off live chickens. Rock and roll excess had a face that night, and it wore a mustache. It was a world far removed from Freddie's strict childhood in India and the quiet London life he entered at just 8 years old. But once he tasted fame, moderation was never part of his vocabulary. Even when HIV began creeping into his life, he refused to slow down. Months after his diagnosis, he turned his 41st birthday into one of Ibiza's wildest nights. 700 guests, 350 bottles of champagne, and fireworks so colossal they lit up the skies all the way in Mallorca. By morning, the bill included the cost of 232 smashed glasses. By the mid-80s, Freddie had climbed so high in fame that even royalty wanted in. His friendship with Princess Diana was an open secret in tight circles. One night, he disguised her in a jacket, hat, and sunglasses and whisked her into London's Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a gay club where she finally slipped out of the world's gaze, if only for a few hours. He also gravitated toward other icons like Michael Jackson. They tried recording together in 1983, but quirks got in the way. Freddie complained over the phone that he simply couldn't keep working with a llama in the studio. On the flip side, Jackson once halted a session after catching Freddie snorting coke through a $100 bill. Their chemistry fizzled, leaving nothing but stories. While the world speculated endlessly about Freddie rarely spoke of it. Not even his parents knew he was. Some believed he had already confessed his truth through Bohemian Rhapsody, hiding his personal struggles in its cryptic lyrics. But in his private world, women were still woven deeply into his story. The great love of his early life was Mary Austin. He met her in 1969 while she was working at the chic fashion boutique Biba. Freddie was 24, broke, and selling clothes at a market stall with drummer Roger Taylor. Mary was 19, grounded, working class, and steady. They fell into each other quickly, moving into a small flat where for years Mary paid the bills, while Freddie chased a dream no one else could yet see. When fame finally came, Freddie proposed. Mary remembered being too shocked to even understand what was happening. But the engagement unraveled when he admitted his attraction to men. Mary recalled telling him flatly that he wasn't at all. He was gay. That conversation ended their romance, but not their bond. She stayed close, worked for his management, traveled with him on tours, and stood by him until his final breath. Freddie called her his common-law wife and left her his Kensington mansion, garden lodge, and half his fortune. She became the keeper of his ashes, a secret she guards to this day. Later came Barbara Valentin, the flamboyant Austrian actress who matched Freddie's energy with fire of her own. During his Munich years, he also fell deeply in love with Winfried Winnie Kirchberger, a German restaurateur who gave him a wedding band he wore proudly. But it was Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser, who became his true life partner. Freddie called him his husband, wore the gold band Jim gave him until the day he died, and built a home with him in Ireland. Jim was by his side for the last 7 years through illness and decline right to the end. Outside of love, Freddie's obsessions burned just as bright. His cats were practically his children, so much so that he would phone home while on tour just to have someone hold the receiver up to their furry ears. His favorite, Delilah, even had a song named after her. His Kensington home brimmed with Japanese art and antiques, treasures he collected with the same passion he poured into music. In the studio, that passion often exploded into fiery clashes. He once joked that Queen argued about the very air they breathed. But that friction was the secret ingredient behind masterpieces that still shake stadiums today. By the end, AIDS had stripped his body of strength, though never his spirit. Freddie didn't confirm his illness publicly until the very day before his death in 1991. He died the next day, at 45, leaving the world stunned. It was impossible to sum him up. Too big, too contradictory, too alive. But perhaps his bandmate Brian May did it best. Freddie Mercury, a lover of life and a singer of songs. Freddie's life was a blaze of contradictions. unapologetically tender one moment, explosively fierce the next. But for all the love he poured into his cats, his art, and his music, not every relationship in his life was built on devotion. Some came with strings attached, and one in particular would leave scars that cut deeper than most. Loyalty for sale. The Paul Prenter betrayal. By the mid-1970s, Freddie Mercury was already well on his way to becoming one of rock's most magnetic forces. But behind the curtain, a man named Paul Prenter quietly stepped into his life and would go on to shape, complicate, and ultimately betray Freddie in ways that are still debated today. It's widely believed that Mercury first met Prenter in 1975 at a bar. 2 years later, Prenter officially became his manager, and soon, rumors began to swirl that the two shared more than just a working relationship. Some claimed they were lovers, though Prenter's brothers would later reject this, insisting it was nothing more than rumor. For a time, things seemed good. The first 5 years of their partnership were thought to be steady, even positive. But by 1982, cracks began to show. Queen released Hot Space, an album drenched in funk and disco influences, a sharp left turn from their usual rock anthems. While Freddie was leaning into the experimental sound, Brian May and Roger Taylor loathed it, and they blamed Prenter for pushing Mercury in that direction. The album underperformed, tensions deepened, and Prenter's bond with the rest of the band frayed almost beyond repair. Still, Freddie kept him around. For several more years, Prenter remained in Mercury's employment, even as the air between him and the band grew heavier. But loyalty has its limits, and when their relationship finally ended, the fallout was explosive. In 1987, Prenter sold a damaging story to The Sun. In it, he publicly revealed Mercury exposed his relationship with Jim Hutton. It was a betrayal that shocked those closest to Freddie. According to his brother Ray, Paul's bitterness came from being cast aside at a time when he himself was battling HIV/AIDS. Ray explained that Paul had worked for Mercury for years and felt abandoned with little to show for it. His words painted a picture of a man who felt betrayed, hurt, and desperate. Ray revealed that Paul, needing money for his treatment, had turned to the papers because he felt he had no other choice. That betrayal left a stain on Prenter's legacy, and for fans of Freddie Mercury, it became one of the darker chapters in the singer's story. That chapter with Prenter left scars, not just on Freddie's public image, but on the fragile trust he placed in those around him. After that kind of betrayal, his circle grew tighter, his guard higher, and his need for privacy even more absolute. Which is why, as his health began to falter, only a chosen few would ever glimpse the truth of what he was enduring. The final curtain call. Freddie Mercury lived his life like no one else. Loud, flamboyant, and unapologetically original. On stage, he was the very definition of showmanship, draped in glittering outfits, commanding arenas with vocals that could rattle the heavens. Yet behind all that color and fire, Freddie built a private world that was fiercely protected. Very few people were allowed behind those high walls, and even fewer knew the truth about what was really happening to him in the final years of his life. By the time November 24, 1991 arrived, the world had lost one of its greatest voices. What stunned so many wasn't just the fact that Freddie Mercury had died. It was how little anyone outside his closest circle had really known. The last time fans caught a glimpse of him on stage with his Queen bandmates was at the Brit Awards in 1990. After that, Freddie began pulling back, slipping further into the shadows of Garden Lodge, his Kensington sanctuary. Inside, he kept company only with those he trusted most: his assistant Peter Freestone, his partner Jim Hutton, and his lifelong friend Mary Austin. The other members of Queen weren't blind to the truth. They could see their bandmate was sick, but Freddie never invited conversation about his health. Rumors had been swirling for years. Tabloids like The Sun ran stories claiming he'd been tested for HIV as far back as 1986. Still, nothing was ever confirmed, and in true Freddie style, he remained in control of the story until the very end. It wasn't until November 23, 1991, just one day before his death, that the world finally heard it from him. His publicist, Roxy Meads, released a statement Freddie had crafted on his deathbed. He revealed he had tested positive for HIV and was living with AIDS. Freddie explained that he had chosen to keep this hidden to protect the privacy of those closest to him. But now the time had come for his fans to know the truth. He urged everyone to stand with him, his doctors, and the wider world in fighting against the disease. 24 hours later, Freddie Mercury was gone. He was just 45 years old. His words mattered, not only because of who he was, but because of when he chose to speak. In the early 1990s, AIDS was a terrifying shadow. There was no cure, and stigma followed anyone associated with it. For Freddie to publicly claim his truth in the face of that fear wasn't just shocking, it was defiant. Queen's surviving members later admitted they had known Freddie was sick, but they never pressed him on it. Brian May recalled how they never actually discussed what was wrong, as though it were an unspoken agreement. Freddie told them he couldn't tour, and that was all he was willing to share. As time went on, it became clear what was really happening, but no one said it out loud. It wasn't until a dinner in Montreux in 1989 that Freddie laid it out to his inner circle. The confirmation hit hard, even if they had already guessed. Brian reflected on how Freddie feared that once the truth was out, his life would turn into a circus. He didn't want sympathy, and he didn't want to be paraded as a victim. What he wanted right until his final days was to keep making music. Business as usual, as he put it, until the very end. Through it all, Jim Hutton stood by him. The two had met in a nightclub in 1985, and what began as a spark turned into a steady love that lasted until Freddie's final breath. At Garden Lodge, the pair shared a private life away from the public eye, even wearing wedding rings to show their commitment. Jim later explained that their relationship was theirs alone, and their wasn't for the world to dissect. On November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury took his final bow at Garden Lodge, his body giving in to bronchial pneumonia brought on by AIDS complications. Nearly 2 decades later, in 2010, Jim Hutton followed after a long fight with lung cancer, passing away at the age of 60. Freddie may have lived his life constantly being watched by the public, but he chose to die on his own terms. And in those last days, he proved once again that even when stripped of sequins, lights, and roaring crowds, he still knew how to have the final bow. What they found in Freddie Mercury's London home shocked his closest friends. When Freddie Mercury passed away in 1991 inside his beloved Garden Lodge, the world mourned the man. But what he left behind inside those high walls in Kensington was something else entirely. A home that felt less like bricks and mortar and more like an extension of his soul. For 30 years it stood untouched, a time capsule of Freddie's eccentricity, taste, and genius. And when people finally caught a glimpse of what lay within, it stunned them as much as the man himself once had. Freddie bought the house in 1980, at the height of Queen's fame, spending £500,000 on what would become his sanctuary at 1 Logan Place, a Georgian-style house that quickly became known among friends as Garden Lodge. It was more than just an address. Behind the now famous green door, Freddie built a retreat that mirrored his every contradiction. Ornate yet intimate, loud yet peaceful, Victorian flair blending seamlessly with Japanese calm. Mary Austin, Freddie's former fiancée and closest confidant, remembered the moment they first walked through that green door. To her, the house instantly felt like a place of peace, a true artist's house. And yet Freddie's flamboyance was everywhere. None more so than in his mirrored dressing room, where he would lace up his white trainers, perfect that mustache, and transform into the unstoppable force that took over stages worldwide. Step past the door, and you were met by saffron yellow walls, bold and warm, a color Freddie adored. It wasn't random. It radiated the same brilliance he carried on stage. The 2-floor drawing room, with its dizzying height, was home to his piano, the very one where Bohemian Rhapsody was born. Upstairs, through that mirrored dressing room, was his bedroom, where the showman finally found rest. For decades, Mary preserved the house exactly as Freddie had left it, as though he might walk back in at any moment, sit at his piano, and start composing again. The gardens were just as extraordinary. Freddie personally oversaw their creation, designing them in a Japanese style. Magnolia trees bloomed in soft pinks. Water features were in the background, and sculpted topiary gave the entire space an otherworldly calm. In Kensington, a place where outdoor space is almost mythical, Freddie had carved out his own Eden. His music room looked out over the garden, and so did the bar where he entertained his closest friends. You can almost picture him there, robe wrapped around his shoulders, glass in hand, gazing out into the blossoms while lyrics and melodies formed in his mind. But Garden Lodge wasn't just a place for living. It became a vault of Freddie's treasures. When Mary eventually chose to part with the house, she first sold over 1,500 of his possessions through Sotheby's, donating the proceeds to AIDS charities. Among the items was the unforgettable replica of St. Edward's crown and the velvet robe he wore during Queen's 1986 Magic Tour. Freddie had slipped into both with a grin, a tongue-in-cheek nod to his title as the self-crowned king of rock. Those images, arms spread wide, crown glinting under the stage lights, remain some of the most iconic of his career. Fans got to glimpse even more. Handwritten lyrics to songs that defined an era, flamboyant stage costumes, and the very objects that had filled Garden Lodge for decades. Perhaps the most staggering item, though, was the green garden door itself, covered with years of fan tributes, love notes, thank yous, and confessions scrawled by strangers who felt like they knew him. When it went under the hammer, it fetched an unbelievable £412,750, nearly the price Freddie had paid for the entire home in 1980. By 2024, when the house was finally listed, its value had soared to over £30 million. Mary admitted that the house had been a joy to live in, brimming with memories of laughter, music, and quiet peace. She hoped that whoever stepped through the green door next would feel what she and Freddie had felt. That it wasn't just a house, but a sanctuary for creativity and love. Garden Lodge wasn't designed to fade quietly into history. It was built, arranged, and lived in with the same rhapsody that defined Freddie Mercury himself. Like his music, it was bold, tender, and timeless. And just like the man, it will continue to draw people in for decades to come. An eternal reminder that Freddie's magic was never just on stage. It lived in every space he touched. Were you ever a fan of Queen? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.